Hello. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Rose Gar, and I'm with the Climate Action Campaign, dialing in from Washington, D.C. What a great crowd we have. Um, we want to hear from folks that are joining us in the chat. Can you put in your name and the state that you're joining from? And if you are a member of an organization that is helping to sponsor this event, tell us the name of the organization in the chat as well. And as a little icebreaker, one more prompt for the chat. Why do you care about climate? And what is giving you hope right now? All right, we're going to get started here shortly. But before I begin, I do have a couple of housekeeping notes. First thing, if you're a member of the media, this is an off-the-record conversation, and we would ask that you keep it off the record. For any kind of official information, you can contact our communications director, Gabby Levy, at glevy, that's Glevy, at cacampaign.org. And if you want to turn on closed captioning, because you like those subtitles, you should click CC. It is a button at the bottom of your screen, and you can select Show Subtitles. And a special thanks to Representative Sean Casten of Illinois for joining us today. We're going to hear from him in just a moment. Welcome again. I see folks are jumping in, and our audience is growing. If you are just coming in, put your name in the chat, the state that you're in. We would also love to hear why you care about climate and what's giving you hope right now. I'd also like to give a big thank you to all the partners and the organizations who are with us today. These are people that put it on the line for clean energy and climate action. There are a lot of organizations that are sponsoring this call, but just to name a few: the League of Conservation Voters, the Sierra Club, Moms Clean Air Force, Environmental Defense Fund, the Natural Resources Defense Council, and many more. Thank you for your work, and thank you for being here today. Thanks as well to everyone in the audience. You are taking time to be part of a movement working to make things better. And I know that I speak for myself and my colleagues and everyone who helped put this together when I say that we're glad that you're here. Coming together and taking action is how we make change. All right, we're going to start in a minute. I want to just say that we are going to hear from Representative Casten, and afterward, we're going to take some live questions from the audience. So there is a Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. If you have a question, put it in there. In addition, we're going to do an action together at the end of this call to help get those climate and clean energy solutions. So stick around after the Q&A. It won't take long. All right, let's get started. We are joined today by Representative Sean Casten of Illinois. He is one of the leading voices on climate and clean energy issues on Capitol Hill. He's the former CEO of a clean energy business, a scientist and an engineer by training, author of more than 20 bills on climate and clean energy. This is a guy who can talk about energy policy with the best of them. He's also got a gift for communication. I would personally recommend his recent 50-point rebuttal on social media of a pundit who tried to argue that embracing oil and gas would be good for consumers and the environment. Representative Casten is known for delivering floor speeches that make energy issues understandable and even fun. In some of those speeches, something close to rapping was involved. But why would I try to describe it when I could just show you? In the summer of 2021, Representative Casten was working to light a fire under the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. And we have a highlight reel. Let's play those clips.
64 days ago, I kicked off Hot Ferg Summer with Megan Thee Stallion and then Fergie to elevate the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission's critical role in solving the climate crisis, and to urge the White House to nominate a fifth FERC commissioner. Some, even in this chamber, have lamented the bad dad jokes and puns, and many have asked, what does this have to do with climate change? I rise to continue our celebration of Hot Ferg Summer. As climate activist Fergie would certainly say, The Fergalicious definition is to make our planet cooler. So listen up, y'all, because this is it. The Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, better known as the F to the E to the R to the C, is one of the most important federal agencies to fight climate change, and if I'm doing this right, one that a few more of you are now keeping track of. The record temperatures from Portland to Death Valley, the wildfires, and the coming hurricane season are all the direct result of our failure to decarbonize as quickly as we must. While this summer is the hottest FERC summer yet, it's coming on the heels of 2020, which was the hottest summer North America has ever seen for as long as we have records. In point of fact, the 10 warmest summers on record have occurred since 1998, and if we fail to act, they will be nothing compared to the summers we'll experience over the coming decades. Because while the best chance to take action on climate was 30 years ago, the last chance is now. Thank you, Madam Speaker, and with apologies to Ms. Stallion, I yield back.
He yields back. Isn't that great? All right. We are here to hear from today to hear Sean Casten talk about his new bill, the Energy Bills Relief Act. We know that families are struggling with high prices, from groceries to housing to energy bills. Energy bills alone have risen by an average of 13% in the last year. It's a huge challenge for families. The good news on the energy front is that solar energy is now cheaper than fossil fuels. So getting more of that built and displacing the more expensive sources like coal and gas are going to keep costs in check. And we won't just get a win on energy bills. This is what we in the business would call a twofer. Getting more solar and wind up and running also means that we're going to reduce climate and air pollution, which is going to improve public health and reduce the existential threat posed by the climate crisis. His new bill has the potential to be flagship legislation next year if the makeup of the House of Representatives changes and we have a pro climate action majority. But we need your help to make that happen. So we are encouraging folks to stay on through Representative Casten's remarks and the Q&A to take action with us to help make that happen. We need your help. All right, Representative Casten, over to you.
Thank you so much, Rose. It is so nice to see some friends here on the screen after being out on the streets yesterday on this, and just appreciate all your support. So I was trying to think of how to explain this bill, and I think it's maybe easiest to explain what we're trying to do in this bill with just a little bit of history. I'm going to try not to bore you. Mike Levin and I both ran on climate change. I believe we were the first two people to ever run on climate change and win our elections. We're certainly at this point the only two people in Congress who actually spent careers before getting into Congress working in the clean energy space. And we came in, Speaker Pelosi appointed us to the Select Committee on the Climate Crisis under the fantastic leadership of Kathy Castor. And we wrote this report, and we went out and said, we actually want to have climate scientists score our report. And so we said, we want to find out everything we can do to meet the need of the moment, and then have climate scientists say, how far did you get? And they came through, they analyzed all of our recommendations, and they said, if you do everything in this report, you will reduce US CO2 emissions by 80%. Which is to say that for all the good work we do, it wasn't quite enough, but we had a bill to do it, and I can get into some wonkiness that the scoring was probably a little bit conservative, but nonetheless, we did that. And then these analysts who looked at our work said, we said, can you tell us where the bottlenecks are going to be if we implement all this? One of the bottlenecks was the U.S. labor force simply isn't big enough. That's a good problem to have, but the amount of stuff we need to build and the speed with which we need to build it, we had labor force problems. We're going to table that one for today's conversation. But the second was that our transmission grid is way too constrained. If we are going to have a society that electrifies loads, that replaces electric generation with clean generation, we're going to build the generation where the sources are, where the wind is, where the sun is, where the geothermal is. We're going to connect up to loads. We're going to add new loads to the system that maybe weren't in the same places as they were before, electric charging stations, electrified factories. That means we're going to need more transmission. And we have never done a good job in this country of building transmission and need to debottleneck it. So fast forward, that report becomes a big part of the Build Back Better program from Biden, and then about half of it gets implemented in the form of the Inflation Reduction Act for reasons relating to Senate procedure. We didn't have a transmission piece, but the IRA, as you all know, was really starting to work and deploying a lot of technology. And And then, of course, Trump comes in, a bunch of people who the only difference between them and fossil fuel is that they're still dinosaurs. But nonetheless, the reforms that came through in this Congress that rolled back a lot of that IRA happened. And we are now seeing, partly as a result of that, these rising costs for energy. We're seeing loads grow, but we don't have the incentives. We have about 1,100 gigawatts of generation in the United States right now. We have 2,000 gigawatts that would like to connect to the queue, and it is all wind, solar batteries. It's all the stuff that we like. And they're not trying to deploy that because it's low carbon. They're trying to deploy that because it's the cheapest source out there and they want to make money. And so as Mike and I sort of went forward, we said, okay, our goal here is to put together a piece of legislation that fixes what Trump broke, adds in the transmission reform that we know needs to get done, and then makes us better on the back end so that we can't come back and make all these, make the same mistakes that were done before. So, and the whole thing was driven by a basic architecture that says, since we know, both as practitioners and as legislators, that the challenge to clean energy is that it presents a competitive threat to dirty energy. There is not a wind farm in the world that gives a damn if a coal plant opens next door, because the wind farm knows that that coal plant will never run in ways that will undercut the economics of the wind farm. By contrast, the coal plant is petrified about the wind farm. They're petrified about the solar panel. They're petrified that you might have a more efficient home that doesn't use as much energy. That's what we're trying to do. So what we said is, okay, our goal is maybe ambitious, but we don't have a lot of time to be, there's no more time for baffling half measures, as Winston Churchill said. So our goal is to say we need an energy policy that is unambiguous. We're going to prioritize the interests of consumers over producers. We need to address the climate crisis with the urgency that it has. And we need to make people who have historically been our adversaries our partners, which means we need to make utilities, give them an economic incentive to lower the cost of energy instead of viewing somebody who wants to lower the cost of energy as a competitive threat. And so with that in mind, the bill goes through, it restores all of the IRA tax credits that the big ugly bill took away. It reverses not only a lot of the Trump's attacks on clean energy, but undoes the rules to make them go away. So it does things like amending the Natural Gas Act that says that you can't build an LNG export terminal unless it's in the national interest. It clarifies that a part of the national interest is you can't raise the price of energy and you can't exacerbate the climate crisis, because that sure seems like the national interest. Says that you can't manufacture emergencies under false pretenses to force the continued operation of fossil fuel plants without some say-so from Congress. You can't just do that unilaterally. A bunch of provisions to better align incentives, give utilities performance-based rate making so that if they're shortening up the interconnection queue, if they're decongesting the grid, if they're helping their state meet their carbon targets, give them an ability to earn a little higher return on equity so that their shareholders will pressure them to do this. If they're going to deploy GETs, grid enhancing technologies that lower the line losses in the grid, let's do that in a shared savings construct where they can keep a little bit of the savings as long as the savings, a bunch of the savings also go on to customers. Let's give more people access to clean energy. That was a big part of the IRA. Let's lower the cost of clean energy so that if you want to not pay for electricity by having a solar panel on your roof, you've got some help to get a solar panel on your roof. But not just there. Let's expand the LIHEAP program so that people have access to low-cost heating. Let's expand the WAP program, not the RAP version of WAP, since you introduced me but the Weatherization Assistance Program. Let's expand that out so that folks at all income levels can have more efficient homes, can have homes that are more resilient against climate change. Let's debottleneck the grid, get rid of some of the barriers that have historically kept transition from being built, like giving FERC authority to sole source authority, as they already have for natural gas. Still have all the reviews, but give one agency the authority. Use the Defense Production Act to mobilize more transformers. I'm talking fast because this is a big bill and there's a lot that's in here, but got a ton of input from a lot of people to get this done. Let's expand the Consumer Advocate Office at FERC so that they can go out and make sure that consumers are protected. And then let's standardize data so that investors can make decisions. Right now, if you want to know what's the interconnect queue in PJM in that part of the grid versus what it is in the Northwest versus what it was in the Southeast, everybody reports on different timelines. They report with different data sets, different levels of granularity. Let's standardize that so that people can make informed decisions about where to site projects. Let's standardize the way that we report the energy use in this country. I could go on, but you've got the headlines here that essentially what this bill does is restores all the progress of the IRA. gets rid of the bottleneck that was there. And oh, by the way, gives us something going into the midterm election where we can say, those chuckleheads who raised your price of power, if you get rid of them, we have the tool to lower your price of power, which is why it's called the Energy Bills Relief Act, because clean energy and cheap energy are complete synonyms. The surest way to make sure that you lower your energy bills is to put yourself in a position where you don't have to pay anybody for fuel to keep your beers cold or your showers hot or your house warm. Um, uh, the We introduced the bill this week. We came out of the gate with 120 co-sponsors, which is more than half of the Democratic caucus. We're really excited about it. It's across all the ideological spectrums in the caucus. We're in the process of gathering endorsements from outside groups, and obviously you can help with both of those things. We'd like to get more members. Quite candidly, our goal, we want this to be the Democratic energy and climate bill going into the next Congress. And I think we're well on our way to do that, but our work isn't done yet. As you talk to people who are running for office, get them to support this, right? Let's get in, let's create some momentum. And you really can't argue with it. I mean, who's against paying less for energy? Who's against leaving a better campsite than we found it? I guess I just leave, and I don't want to be, I hate leaving on a down note, but it's what you put in that clip before. We are truly out of time. The laws of the United States are fickle. They bounce back and forth when different groups come in, but the laws of physics are not. And we can either sit around and pretend that this is something that maybe we'll solve at some point in the future, or we can get our act together and do it now. And we have this amazing opportunity that if we deal with this with the urgency that the physics demands, we're also all going to get really rich because we'll stop paying for energy. So whether you want to do it because you're a good citizen or do it out of greed, let's just get it done. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Representative. I don't know that that was a down note, but I hear you. This is a serious problem. All right, we're going to take some questions. So folks, there is a Q&A box along the bottom of your screen. If you have a question for Representative Casten, put it in there. We're going to try to get to as many as we can. All right, our first question for the night, Max Flores from Tucson, Arizona. Max, the floor is yours.
Hi, Max.
It's nice to meet you. So, I'm 18. I'm a student at the University of Arizona, and as such, like a lot of the people in my community, I've spent my entire life hearing about, the climate crisis and the potential consequences that it's threatening over our livelihoods. Now, I love what you've done, especially with the bill. I think, I agree with what it stands for, but I'm worried, especially when I look at our political climate in modern politics, what this means going forward. What's it going to take for politicians to wake up and start listening to our youth and the communities here in college campuses and in cities around the world who are already sick of like the climate denial that keeps happening?
Look, the first and most important thing is vote, and it is a sad but true fact that in every generation, the least likely group of people to vote are young people. And there's a bunch of reasons for that, but it always creates a situation, and I don't think it has to be cynical about it. You create a situation where people saying, I want to win elections, I'm going to call people, I'm going to do some polls, and the first question in the poll is, are you likely to vote in the next election? If you answer no, there are no further questions. If you answer yes, then the questions continue. And I think one of the challenges that I find as a member who cares about this stuff is that there are too many people who never get to talk about climate because the questions you get from the likely voters are questions that older people care about. They care about Social Security. They care about Medicare. They care about making sure that their homes are appreciating in value. You got to vote and you got to participate is a big part of the key. The other thing, and I think it's important to understand this, is that the reason why the politics of climate is so hard is because clean energy is so damn cheap. If we deployed, the United States generates half as much GDP per unit of energy as the Brits do. Almost a third, not quite a third as much as the Danes do. Which means that if we went out and deployed clean energy and really committed to not subsidizing energy extraction, but rather subsidizing efficient utilization, we would be engaged in the biggest wealth transfer in our country's history, from energy producers to energy consumers. which would decimate the economies of places like West Virginia more than it is right now. And, we tried to address that in the IRA, recognizing that by saying, let's prioritize investments in those communities because we want to sympathize with that. But I think we have to understand those politics that for people who live in areas that have historically depended on those industries, cheap energy is a threat. Competition is hard, right? Half the population is below average. They don't like competition, right? And that's a good problem to have, but I think you've got to acknowledge that and sort of be empathetic to those folks and try to build those bridges. And that's so much of why what we're doing here is to saying let's align those interests so that energy producers feel like this is a winning strategy for them and not a competitive threat. Because in my experience, that's what's really helped. That's what's made our politics so sticky.
Thanks, Congressman. All right, I'm going to read a couple of questions and we're going to go from here. All right, this is a question from Tim Kelly. Tim Kelly asked, I'm very concerned about the trend of climate hushing, quote unquote, especially among some of your Democratic colleagues. Marketing data tells us that you can connect climate change to people's lives if you frame it right. What's your take on the party's reluctance to take on disinformation and get climate back up on the table?
So I would argue, and there's, I don't speak for our whole party. I mean, heck, I don't speak for the whole Congress. There's only 435 of us, right? I mean, if you consider yourself a Democrat, then you're just as able to speak on this as I am. But I would say that over the course of my, professional life, including but not limited to being as a legislator, I think we've always talked about climate, but we don't always use the word climate. I can remember 20 years ago, State Department and the Defense Department saying that climate change was the biggest national security risk that our country faced because the desertification of North Africa was going to lead to waves of migration, folks who were suddenly homeless. It was going to destabilize Europe. Well, here we are, right? It was going to lead to, more extreme storms in the Caribbean. That was also going to lead to waves of migration. Well, here we are. We knew that it was going to lead to health issues as tropical diseases became subtropical diseases, and here we are. We knew it was going to lead to vulnerabilities in the insurance and housing industry because of how much property is concentrated in coastal areas or wildfire-prone areas, and we're now seeing surges. Now, does somebody use the word climate change when they say, I have concerns about what's happening, in our migration policy? I have concerns about what's happening in the places we're becoming entangled around the world. I have concerns about what's happening to my home insurance rates. Not necessarily. And I think we have a role sometimes to connect those dots for people. But if you know that people care about the causes of climate more than they care about climate, and you're a very good politician, we'll talk about the things that resonate with them and connect that back to take action on it. And so even if you don't, it's sort of like if you speak to someone who doesn't speak English, but they're fluent in French, speak in French, right? And you can still have the same message. Do we always do that perfectly? No. But I think we're in a moment where those effects of climate are more resonant. And so I think it's appropriate to speak about those effects while still keeping our eyes on the prize of why we're doing it and make sure that we're addressing the root causes.
Thank you. All right, I'm going to keep moving. Leslie asks, how can local and grassroots help with this effort?
So look, legislatively, it's public now. You can go on the web and you can see who's signed on. If your member's not on, give them a call, ask them to get on. Republicans can get on this too, right? Let's build this out. If you're a member of a labor union or a clean energy organization or someone who endorses, get them on. Those things matter as people look to see how this matters. If you know candidates who are running for office, let them know to push it. If you have good ideas for how to improve the bill, let us know that as well, right? The bill's released right now, but we're not so high on our own supply that we think we got it perfect, in spite of our 4 years of work on it. But I also think, outside of this bill, I think the most important thing that any of us can do in this moment is just deploy, 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 deploy. If you've got the ability to, put a solar panel on your roof, put some more efficiency in, do it. You will not regret it economically. Maybe you don't have that kind of cash in your pocket, but maybe you're a student and you can convince the administrator of your school and the trustees to say, how come we've got these inefficient light bulbs in here? Let's go get that done. Um, and when we're at these moments where you have something that is very profitable, that the business community wants to build, and legislation used to be supportive but has dropped down a little bit, that's when you need the private sector to come on harder, not dial back, right? To offset some of what's going on. Some states have been effective partners in trying to shore up some of the gaps. Um, but don't give up hope. Just, we all have agency, right? And use whatever agency you have and just recognize that this problem is so big that if you're the only way we succeed is if you leverage a lot of other people. So whatever organization you're a member of that you can leverage, go get it and go do it.
Love that. Thank you. All right. I have a question from Ronald that I think picks up on what you're saying around businesses and the business community and where they're at. He asks the business community, except for fossil fuel related businesses, they should be clamoring for a bill like the one you described. Energy savings, reducing climate and supply chain risk, et cetera. How can we get businesses on our side in support of this legislation?
So overwhelmingly they are, and it's a question of how noisy they are. I mean, if you go, you can get caught up in all the hype of, whatever nonsense Chris Wright is out there, Secretary of Energy, is saying right now. But look at what people are building. No one is out there saying, finally, I can build another coal plant, right? The oil use today in the United States is basically the same as it was 15 years ago. We're driving more, but given the choice, people, individuals and businesses kind of, if you're a business that owns a fleet, you want to pay a lot for gas or a little for gas. That's not a hard choice, right? And so if you've got a more efficient fleet, if you've got an electric fleet, businesses are doing that for self-interest reasons for the same reason people are. The stuff that's all out there that people want to build is all the clean stuff, and businesses are making those investments, and investment banks and private equity firms. That's where all the action is. I'm not gonna lie, it does frustrate me a little bit that you had businesses who were so public about supporting climate initiatives when that was the politically easy thing to do, who have gotten very quiet when it's politically hard to do that. And, I think if you're going to call yourself a leader, the definition of leadership is doing things when it's hard, not doing things when it's easy, provided people follow you, of course. And so I think the rhetoric is much less encouraging than it was a few years ago. But, the first rule of negotiating with somebody is don't watch their lips, watch their feet. And their feet are still moving in a positive direction.
Awesome. Thank you. All right. I've got a more political question from Ben. Ben's asking about how this legislation is going to make it through. And he says, how can any bill pass if this president is not going to sign it?
Impeach the bastard and get another president. Look, I don't. If I was good at predicting what Donald Trump would do next and what opinions he'd have, I couldn't have told you who was guessing 3 months ago that he was going to say we should put a cap on interest rate fees or that private equity shouldn't own homes. He is not a man who has a coherent set of ideas other than self-promotion. That makes him very hard to manage too, but it's hard to predict how that goes through. I think our job in the legislative branch is to put together legislation that solves the problem. Like if we're going to pass a bill and say the great thing about this bill is that it has bipartisan support, you should immediately question what the bill actually does, because in your own office, if somebody came to you and you said, how'd you do on your report, Bob? And Bob said, well, I worked on it with somebody who disagrees with me on how to interpret the Second Amendment. You're like, not answering the question, Bob. What did you do? And so I think our first job is, do we do the policy right? And then do we create the politics that follows? I'm super encouraged that when this is a second iteration of this bill, when Mike and I introduced it last term, we peaked at 86 co-sponsors. We're out of the gate with 120. That's good. That support is building, right? We've got, you may have seen the Senate is sort of working on this as well. Is it likely that's going to pass in this Congress? No, not with Mike Johnson. But let's get it in place where we've got it. And these bills, you never know when windows are going to open in Washington. I think if we had this bill after we had passed the IRA, and there was that brief moment of we really want to do permitting reform, and the only player there was the Manchin-Barrasso bill that didn't have legs. If we'd had this bill then, we could have had a serious conversation. So let's get it done so that when the window does open, we can move. Is it likely that we can get it done with Donald Trump in the White House? Probably not, but you never know in this town. So let's do the work and have it teed up and ready to go and have the kind of broad support that somebody says this is not only good policy, but is broadly supported by the Congress as well.
Yeah, great. And I just want to like uplift what you're saying around this is a bill that we're teeing up now so that it is ready to go when we do have that moment, when there are majorities in the House and the Senate, and a president that's willing to sign it, who are ready to take action on climate change. Thank you.
And I want to stress, like, yes, it is highly unlikely to see this without Democratic majorities, but also keep in mind there are a ton of Republican districts. If you flip a district from red to blue, and all of a sudden the Democrat supports this, they're representing the same people, right? So if the interests of that district are going to flip, then that means the interests of that district are there right now. I've made the argument many times that the entire Iowa delegation should be 100% on board with clean energy. They don't have coal reserves. They don't have fossil reserves. They have a ton of wind. Right, and they have a hard time getting their wind into markets where they can sell it for more. They should love this stuff, right? And we shouldn't have to wait for a Democrat to be there. But I think, talk to those members who are saying, if this has benefit in your district, go get on it, right?
Yep.
At the end of the day, there are more consumers than producers in this country. And if democracy works, they got the numbers.
All right. I've got a question from Jeffrey, who's asking about the opposition. He says, how do you combat the pushback and the lobbying from power generating companies and from fossil fuel companies that are fighting against backyard and neighborhood solar and renewables?
Well, look, I mean, everybody, the opposition comes in different ways. I think in general with power companies, I'm more sympathetic to their vantage point because they're sitting there saying, I have an obligation to serve, if I'm a regulated utility, I have an obligation to serve everybody in this utility territory. I get in trouble if there's an outage. I need to deal with this reliability. And I think there's a certain sympathy you can have with them that says you should be agnostic on fuel. You should be agnostic on, what generator sizing and generator location, as long as it doesn't step on your obligation to serve and your reliability. And we both know that you're not agnostic because of the way that the rules work and because you don't actually make money if you lower costs for your consumers because operating costs are pass-throughs. So let's talk about how to make this a win for you. Does every utility get that? No. But I think there's a sympathy and a recognition that this is something we can transition to. The fossil fuel industry is much harder. And I think the challenge, and I'm saying this as empathetically as I can, the challenge you have in the fossil fuel industry is that, broadly speaking, you dig stuff out of the ground. It costs you something to dig it out of the ground, and then you get to sell it for whatever the price is in the market that you don't control. Then if you're in the middle of that's the upstream end of the industry. The midstream, you refine it, you turn it into gasoline, you take something in a known product that's a commodity, you turn it into something that's another commodity with a lot of capital. And then downstream, you sell it at the gas station. The whole fossil fuel industry makes virtually no money on anything other than the upstream end. They know how to, if you've got a well that costs you $40 to lift a barrel of oil out of the ground and the market's 80, you make $80. If you've got a refinery, you're lucky to get 2-3% margins on the conversion. And so you've got these industries that have huge amounts of capital tied up, a lot of expertise, a lot of jobs. And it is an existential threat to all those jobs and all that capital if you deploy things that make their product less attractive, because they don't really know how to pivot into the downstream end of the industry and make money at it. And the proof in the pudding is that every time they try, they get out. Remember when British Petroleum became Beyond Petroleum and they dabbled in solar and they just couldn't make enough in that side of the business. It's a different business. And, one can be sympathetic to them in the same way that I can be sympathetic to John Henry when he lost the fight with the steam shovel. But I'm not going to stand in the way of the future.
think I just learned about the steam shovel guy, John Henry. Thank you. Um, uh, this is a more personal question. It's from Ida. My mom is 75 and lives alone. I worry about her during heat waves because if her air conditioning fails, she'll be in serious danger. And this is because it's because of climate change that it's getting more and more expensive to cool her home. What does this bill do for folks like my mom?
So probably the most important thing is the provisions around expanding LIHEAP and the Weatherization Assistance Project, which is to make sure that folks, so many of the things that we want our energy system to do, the average American has, or I'm sorry, the median American has $8,000 in their bank account. Which means that if you are at or below that level and your air conditioner breaks, you may not have enough cash to go and replace it, right? And so these programs like the Weatherization Assistance Program, like LIHEAP to provide more affordable energy, is to make sure that we guard against that. And part of the reason why I said that I've got some sympathy to the utilities is that utilities are sort of half capitalist, half socialist businesses. And they're capitalists that they have outside investors, they've got to raise money, they've got shareholders, but they've got an obligation to make sure the power keeps flowing to people like your grandmother, to make sure that even if they miss a bill payment or two, they're still covered. And I think if we're going to live in a decent, empathetic society, we want our energy infrastructure to continue to do that. But we need to make sure that there's programs, and I've name checked a couple of the federal programs, but we've historically had federal programs to prop those things up so that when somebody has to incur costs to make sure that stays on, there's money in the kitty, and somebody has to incur costs to protect that home that's covered. The set not within this bill, but other legislation that we're working on is on climate financial risk, because one of the really big problems that you can see coming down the pike is that as home insurance rates go up, if you have a mortgage, your insurer decides not to cover your jurisdiction anymore because it's too expensive, they'll pull out, and your mortgager will say, I'm going to replace you with another insurance because otherwise I'm going to pull your mortgage away. If you don't have a mortgage, there's no pressure to do that. And we're seeing a rising concentration of homes in climate vulnerable locations where they don't have any insurance, and that's more likely among seniors because seniors are more likely to have paid off their homes. And we need to deal with things in our financial markets, separate bill, separate piece of legislation, not in this bill, but it's something we got to stay focused on.
Yeah, understood. Agree. All right, we're gonna take one more question. Kate Caldwell from Illinois is teed up, and I just want to say a huge thanks to everyone who is offering comments in the Q&A box. We have gotten so many questions. It is awesome. We are not going to be able to get to them all, unfortunately. This will be our last one. But Kate, are you ready to go? The floor is yours.
Hi, Kate.
Hi, Congressman. I'm currently on Amtrak. So first, I want to thank you for everything that you've done. And I'm so happy that the great state of Illinois gets to go last for this question. But you talked a little bit about the Trump administration and congressional Republicans. But I want to ask if you can dive a little bit deeper into how this specific bill will kind of help disadvantaged communities, specifically implementing those programs that were already rolled back by Republicans, especially in the Trump administration. So specifically like the Solar for All program that was under the Inflation Reduction Act, will we see more, I guess, investments into disadvantaged communities, or will we see more federal programs that allocated those dollars to minorities and to disadvantaged communities? Will we see that with this bill? And thank you again, Colin and Springfield.
Well, thank you, and thank you for your support for mass transit as well, Kate. So look, we bring back all of the incentives that were in the IRA, and so all those provisions that were in there. You're going to get me with a little bit of a deeper dive of what I remember of some of there's a whole separate provisions around environmental justice provisions, protections for consumer advocates that are in there as well. But I think the most important thing that the IRA did, and I don't think we talk about this enough, is that everybody would like to have cheap energy. Given the choice between would you like to not have to pay for gasoline for your car, not have to pay for electricity for your house, not have to pay for natural gas to stay warm, or pay for them, everybody knows which one of those they want, right? If you don't have enough money in your pocket, to insulate your home, to caulk your windows, to get an electric vehicle for your driveway, to put, solar panels on the roof or a heat pump, then all of a sudden you're left out, which means that the people who have historically had the first access and the highest access to lower cost energy are people who've got a little extra coin, right? And in the IRA, both by providing those tax credits, but then also by making those tax credits refundable, so that you didn't just have to be someone who's a taxpayer who's got a tax accountant, but you say, look, I'm going to put this thing on and get $1,000 credit, and I can go to somebody and say, you keep the $1,000 and I'll go get this done. It was designed to bring that down. We also designed those incentives and stacked them up so that if you were in one of these energy transition communities, we're going to give you a little bit more incentive than you're not. If you're using union labor, we're going to give you a little bit more of incentive than not. All that was designed to enhance the equity of access to clean energy. And so, yes, all that's back in because all those standards come in. Is it enough? Of course, there's good ideas, and if you have good ideas, Kate, pass them along. But I do think that particularly when we're talking about, if we're talking about water effluent from a sewage tank or mercury or particulate emissions, there are very specific local issues that have historically affected disadvantaged communities. If we're talking about CO2, it's a global pollutant. Where it's emitted doesn't matter as much. And so I think let's make sure that people have access to cheap energy. But as against that, I want to get the CO2 down as quick as possible. And I don't think it's as wise to be distracted by saying, well, we could reduce 1 million tons if we did it over here, or we could benefit this community and do 100. Let's do the 1,000,000 tons, but then let's make sure that every community has access to save money on energy so that we can lift all boats.
Thank you, Congressman. All right, that was our last question. I'm going to encourage the audience to stay on. We have a very short action that we want to take with you. Congressman, thank you so much for taking time out of your night and making a strong economic case, a strong climate case for why we need this bill, and a strong case about how it's actually going to benefit people and improve lives. Really appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you, Rose. Thanks you all. Thanks for the great questions. And I don't know, send all the rest to our office and we'll eventually get to them.
Will do.
Thanks so much.
All right. So as I talked about before, we need your help. We are looking to flood Congress with calls, letters, messages. We want to say that we want clean energy and we want climate action. So here's what you can do right now. Look in the chat. There is a link that you can click. We want to take 2 minutes to send a letter to your member of Congress asking them to co-sponsor the Energy Bills Relief Act. Your letter, all you need to do is enter your name and address when that link comes up, and your letter will be automatically delivered to your member of Congress. So, and if your member has already co-sponsored the Energy Bills Relief Act, they'll get a thank you. All right, so folks should do that now. The link should be in the chat. And if you can drop into the chat that you've signed it, when you've signed it, it'll be cool to see who all has taken action. Again, our coalition is very grateful to the audience on this call and to Representative Casten and Representative Levin, his partner, for leading on climate and clean energy issues. And we want to send a thank you note to them as well. So after you sign that letter through the link in the chat, that'll take you to a page where you can sign a thank you note. You can also just drop in the chat a note of thanks and what you're taking away from this call. All right, thank you everyone for taking that action. Thank you for joining tonight, and we'll be in touch soon about more work that we can do together. Thank you.